probably at their wits' end, having probably tried to interest me and engage me in virtually every sport that existed with not great effect. And I always say it's an interesting thing when you find the sport that you love, and I suppose that everybody would always talk in glowing terms about, you know, their passion, but I think that there's something quite unique around fencing. The sword, for a start. I mean, we overlook the reason. I think it's number one reason why people get into fencing is the sword, because of course the mere act of holding a sword is just quite exciting. And then I think there's a range of other things. It's a combat sport, but it's the only combat sport where Olympic combat sport where you're not actually physically sort of touching another person. You know, I can touch you, but I'm hitting you with a sword. And I think that makes it much more accessible, particularly for teenage girls. So when, you know, I was 11, but as you go 11, 12, 13, it's not necessarily something you might feel as comfortable. You need a certain degree of self-confidence to get into boxing and judo and karate. So it's quite, for somebody that didn't have a lot of self-confidence at the time, you can put on a mask and pick up a sword, and you're also not required to fulfill a role like you are in team sports. So if we do netball, for example, someone goes, oh, well, Charles, you're going to be goal attack. So here I'm going to give you, you can plant, you know, here's your tabard with GA on the back. And you have to play that position, and you have to embody what the kind of personality, if you like, of goal attack. So aggressive and attacking. Whereas the nice thing about fencing is your personality can come through, and you know, yes, there are times you might want to be more aggressive or more defensive, but you can fundamentally be very much yourself and develop your own style within that.
Even with your face completely covered by a mask,
yes,
it's individual.
Yes, exactly.
And when you were that age, and fencing in Scotland, you know, they talk about facilities for sport. What were facilities for fencing like back then?
Well, we were lucky. We had access to Meadowbank, and I don't think Meadowbank, I don't know if it exists in the same way now. No. And that was, no, I don't think it is. And that was incredible. There was a thriving fencing club. We used to fence on, I think it was the archery, one of the archery ranges. And there was, at the time, there was, and I can't remember the government initiative, but there was money put in which supported coaches to go around schools coaching sport. Wow. And so as part of that, I think a lot more people got involved in sport, both you know, in state and the private sector, which led to a much more healthy community, which still to this day has produced a number of you know, fencers that have represented Scotland. So I think investment in, first of all, having the facilities are extremely important, and then also having the people, you know, because at the end of the day, it's the coaches that inspire you, and it's all very well having a building, but it's as equally important to have a great coach.
So you did epee, you were starting to win,
yep.
And then suddenly
yep.
you picked up the academy. So how come you ended up at Henderson Row?
Well, fencing was one of the reasons. Oh. So at the time, the Edinburgh Academy the fencing club had a really great reputation, and Patsy was an epee specialist, the coach there. And so that was one of the reasons. And I think one of the other reasons, my brother was there. He was also fencing, so there's a good opportunity to come to his school and beat him regularly. Hope you're listening, Eric. And
obviously you could play boys, because there were only, I don't know how many,
yes.
How many girls were there in your year?
Do you know, that's a really good question. I don't remember there being that many, but I don't know, there's two of my, so it was myself and one other girl in my form class.
Right.
So I guess you kind of multiply that, I don't know, maybe 10, 12.
10, 12. Because this was at the time when a lot of girls in Edinburgh girls' schools did the final 2 years, the kind of A-level years at the academy. This is back in
I wouldn't, probably not a lot, but I think a lot of people did change schools for the last 2 years, and certainly the Edinburgh Academy was one destination. And
how did you feel about going to a boys' school? Because it was effectively it was a boys' school then, with a few girls.
Yeah, I think the thought of, you know, I think people do look back and they go, oh, you know, what was it like? And I don't remember feeling particularly apprehensive about going. And certainly once you arrive, I think probably what people perceive as what it might be like, it's just not like that at all. I remember that day one, to be honest, most of the boys just ignore you,
Yeah.
because they're too busy sort of, I say fighting each other.
Yes.
But, you know, they're just boys at school, and, you know, oh yeah, well, there's a girl, and, you know, and then they just crack on with, you know, day-to-day life. And for me, I would say that there's, you know, some of the great things about the academy and being in an environment which is so male dominated is frankly, you know, you people genuinely don't care, for example, what you look like.
Yeah.
So in an all girls school, there's a lot of pressure, particularly when they allowed you to wear your own clothes, around what do you wear and how you look. And, you know, and you'd think that going to a boys' school might make you more conscious, but actually very quickly you realize that they don't, you know, a girl's a girl, and do they really notice whether you're wearing, you know, doing your hair or wearing makeup? They absolutely don't. So you can turn up, it's not a thing. And it's very liberating to just suddenly be yourself and not have to be judged in perhaps the way that girls can sometimes judge each other.
And you have a natural advantage, because obviously we can't see it here, but you're quite tall, so
yes,
you were sort of at eye level with a lot of the lads in the 6th and 7th year.
yes, I don't sort of ever remember having to use that as a mechanism to get out of any trouble or to get something. But I think that certainly it helped with my fencing.
Yes.
And it was great to have a sport which, and I still think fencing is great for this reason, where you can happily fence. You know, boys and girls can fence together. It can be very mixed, in mixed ages, mixed genders. It really doesn't matter, and train together and have fun. And that's certainly to be able to, and the strength, and coming to the academy already having a group of people who I used to train with outside of school really did help in terms of settling in.
So you had 2 years of A-level studies and decent fencing.
Yes.
Happy time, good memories in and out of class?
I think, yeah, on the whole, yes. I mean, I think everybody's schooling days will always have a few memories where things didn't go so well, but I would say that my overriding memories are of having fun, of the approach to, and I don't know whether it's a different teaching, girls and boys, but certainly the teachers were very willing to engage in discussions in a way that I hadn't been used to. So whereas previously, when you kind of, a teacher would say X and you'd go, actually, you know, that's rubbish, why? The experience I would have had prior to that would have been, you know, sit down, shut up. That's a kind of, you know, that's not how we as young women need to be educated.
Yeah.
Whereas at the academy, it was just taken as read, I think, by most of the teachers, that you ask the boys to do something or you tell them something, and the first thing you get is an argument. And I found that really liberating. I mean, you know me, Charles, love an argument about anything.
And did your status as a pretty decent fencer give you status in the school like someone who was, say, in the first 11 or the first 15?
No, I think it probably made me the butt of quite a lot of jokes more than anything, but only because there was just this ongoing joke that I kept winning stuff so clearly that, you know, it was like, oh God, you know, there she goes again.
I suspect that they were deep down fairly proud of you in amongst all that boy joshing repartee.
Possibly, but it was, I always felt it was good humoured.
Yeah.
So it was never in a way that made me feel bad about who I am, and it didn't make me feel, and I think that's so important, that's the best you can hope for, is that when you're in a great school, it makes you more confident in who you are. Yes. It's not saying that I have to be like anyone else or whatever it is, but if I can be me and feel that people value me, or, you know, or tolerate me at best, but that's what's important. And I certainly felt that at the academy.
You're obviously very comfortable there, and you talked about the boys ignoring you, but there was one that clearly didn't ignore you.
That's true. So, yeah, I was very fortunate to meet a young man at the time, Justin McGregor Watson, who is now my husband. And so I can still remember the first day I met him, actually, it was the first day of school, and despite living around the corner, he was late. So he did, Dr. Blackmore, who was our form teacher, did give him a bit of a row. and that was the first time I laid eyes on him. So,
Well, the only way is up, as they say.
yes.
So you then took your fence, you then took your epee and your A levels, and you trotted off to Cambridge, and
Yeah.
presumably continued to fence and study for 3 years there. Did you get a blue?
I think I did. It was a weird question. Someone asked me that, and I was like, yeah, I think so.
The half blues there, I don't know.
I think it's a half blue, but I know that you can get your half blue upgraded depending on whether you represent Great Britain
Right.
in certain things. So I think I did. And that sounds a terrible thing to say, but I think one of the things I am really bad at is once I've achieved something in sport, I just crack on to the next thing.
Yes.
And I think it's only now as I get older and sometimes doing these interviews that people ask me these questions. Yes. And I go, oh, I'm not sure. And then I think I really ought to know that. So I ought to go back and find out what I won or what I did. But yes. What you do is you kind of go, yep, done that. Okay, on to the next, on to the next.
There are many sports people who virtually can name every goal or try that they scored, but you clearly can't be bothered with all that.
No, I'm more likely to remember the losses. I do take loss particularly badly. So in as much as I will probably be able to remember the time I didn't win the national championships rather than who I fenced when I did win, which is kind of strange.
Don't they say that success is always built on failure?
Yes, a lot of it. I'd say I should be enormously successful, the amount of failure. But then with fencing, as with lots of sporting competitions, you go in and there can be, potentially over, 100 people in for a competition, and there is only one winner, which means everybody else will lose.
That's the nature.
Because, that's the way it goes. So
as you got your, what did you study as a degree?
So I did computer science, believe it or not.
So you were doing computer science, you were fencing, and then presumably you graduated and you started work. But
yes.
There was a point at which you said to yourself, presumably, I'm going to have a real go at proper fencing career.
Yes.
And when was that, and why was that?
So I think during my time at university, I'd obviously been keeping my fencing going, and in my finals year, I took a step back to concentrate on actually passing my finals exams.
That helps.
And then after that, I think it was only a few months out, and myself and my brother actually went out to Hungary at the time and went to a fencing club, and I really enjoyed the experience. And of course, that opens your eyes to other possibilities of training abroad. So I did that as a kind of stopgap between finishing university and starting work. And then on starting work, I do remember kind of getting this strange, it was very hard. I joined one of the consulting firms, and I would say it was lots of hours, and probably not, oddly enough, not the kind of culture I was necessarily used to. Having been at the academy, which oddly enough was very, for me, very accepting of myself and as a woman, and then going to university, which didn't really, treat me any differently for being female. Maybe admittedly surrounded by a bunch of fellow computer scientists. It was the talk is about your computers, and to then come into a work environment where, we were still told that you had to wear a skirt. Mm-hmm. So the dress code was different for women. Women were expected to behave differently. They were treated differently. And I found that very difficult because, of course, my education and where I'd been at school and my university and my experience in fencing was not one that had sort of geared me towards a life of this kind of, behaving, in a sort of more, I would say subservient, but that sounds a bit weird. But so I think, you do kind of go, oh God, is this what it's all for? Is this it? Is it, have I absolutely spent all my life being told by my parents and everybody else, you've got to pass your exams, you've got to do your degree, you've got to do all these things so you can get this amazing job, and then somehow life will be this I don't know, this amazing thing, and you arrive and you suddenly go, but I don't think I want it, I don't want this, I don't feel comfortable, I'm not enjoying it, and so at that time I remember thinking very much around, well, if this was it, if this is my life, what have I achieved? Mm-hmm. Or what haven't I achieved, more to the point? And the answer to that question for me was, I've never really seen if I could be good at fencing, like properly good.
Had you never thought that before? Had you never thought at the academy, gosh, give it a try? Presumably because it wasn't professional, you couldn't really make any money.
Well, exactly. And it was a hobby. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved it. And I took it as seriously as one might for what I call a, domestic level fencer. But I'd never thought, you know what, could I be in the top 100 in the world, the top 50 in the world? How good could I be? And I think that was the unanswered question that drove me to then, it took quite a long time to set the wheels in motion. I certainly, and I am lucky because work was quite supportive when I turned around and said, this was my plan, and they did make it easier for me to change the work that I was doing and allow me to save some money and spend some time preparing for what was then a full-time move to Eastern Europe. So went out to Budapest and was there based there full-time training with the Hungarian national squad.
You had many highlights. You were British #1. You're in the world top 15, and you won 4 Commonwealth medals, which you're very proud of, representing Scotland, of course. But clearly, whenever he thinks of fencing, obviously you think of the Olympics, and that's probably an unfavourite moment.
Yes, and I do talk about the probably the worst moment in my fencing career was a sort of rundown sports hall in Armenia, where they held the zonal qualifiers, and the zonal qualifiers was the route to qualifying to the Olympics for nations whose teams weren't strong enough and hadn't finished high enough. Mm-hmm. And of course, fencing being what it was and slightly still is, as a nation, we don't have the volume of top level fencers to really create a strong team. So there tends to be individuals who kind of go out and try and find these qualification slots. And and it's a knockout tournament, and I think at the time only the top 2 or top 1 gets to go to the Olympics from the European zone, and I lost. And it was a very close match, and I still kind of, even now talking about it hurts. Yep. And it takes quite a long time to get over not making it to the Olympics. So every opening ceremony, particularly watching Sydney, I went down to train and spar with the pentathletes, and that's the hardest thing I've had to do, is to help other people compete and train and go. I was in the holding camp and they go down to the village and they participate, and I remember going to a bar and watching the opening ceremony and just crying, because you put so much into it. And I think people we talk a lot about Olympic athletes, and so we should, and particularly those that then win medals, but there's often thousands of other people who have tried and failed. And of course, the trying and failing in itself, I kind of refuse to let that moment of failure define me, because if I stack it up alongside everything else that I've achieved and all the life experiences that I've had through my sport, if someone said to me, do you know what, Georgina, you have to do it all again with exactly the same outcome. So you're going to give up everything, you're going to train, you're going to travel the world, you're going to do it all, and you are still not going to go, would you do it again? And I would do it again in a heartbeat, because the positive experience of all of that by far outweighs that single moment of failure. Although it does, and I think anybody who's tried to make it to the Olympics and failed said, it's not an easy thing to get over, because everybody asks you, did you make it to the Olympics?
Yes, but you've had a stellar career, Commonwealth medals, world top 15, as I've said, and you're still fencing now, and you were British senior champion 10 times. So clearly you've enjoyed your career.
I have, and I've been very lucky. I think I've tried to retire 3 times. I think I'm on a current retirement though, Charles. It's been a while. I certainly, over the last, it was 2014 when I won the Commonwealth, and I think I have a few European veteran titles after that, but which veterans B is the over 40s before.
So having had all this experience in playing fencing, at what stage did you then say, do you know, I could actually run this sport?
Well, I think I probably never thought that, and I have to blame the previous chair of British fencing for putting me here, because I joined the Board of British Fencing in 2012, so after the London Games. And there was a lot of change going on at that time, and a lot of requirement to kind of move British fencing to improve the governance and all sorts. And the then independent chair of fencing had taken over, and there were board elections. And I think the board was being completely replaced in 2 tranches, and I was in the sort of the first tranche. And I sort of look back, and I think for me, originally getting involved is I always wanted to give something back. And obviously after a while, you know, there's only so much you can really give back, and actually very little as an athlete just competing for yourself. And I did want to get involved and do more. And so I sat on the board for a couple of years, and I do remember David Teasdale then saying to me, well, you know, Georgina, have you thought about, you know, whether you'd be interested in the chief exec job? And I remember at the time going, David, I'd be an idiot. Why would I want a job like that? You know, it's a thankless, you know, task, extremely hard work. And I think he slowly wore me down. And I said to him, look, I will, all I can offer is that if you decide to go out for we had an interim chief executive who was great, but they decided they wanted a more permanent the board decided the more permanent chief exec, I will put my hat in the ring. I'll go through the interview process. And somehow, yes, I ended up in the position I am. So I think once the process starts, again, I'm a bit competitive. Yeah. It's all very well saying you don't want the, you know, oh, I'm not too worried, but then you kind of go, actually, you know, and I'm very lucky because it's, for all the difficulties and for all the heartbreak with some of the things we've gone through with losing funding, I'm so lucky to work in a sport that I love. I really am, and I get so much enjoyment from watching our athletes like Marcus Mepstead at the moment. He's doing so well in men's foil. He's on track to qualify for the Olympics when qualification reopens. I absolutely love watching our athletes win at the highest level. But I also take so much joy in some of the community projects that we do, and watching. There's been some incredible publicity around our Muslim Girls Fence project. But watching young girls who have been given the same opportunity I was, age 11, to pick up a sword and start to feel differently about themselves and get that self-confidence and use that. It doesn't matter if they don't go on and become a championship fencer, but maybe they go on in it and have confidence and achieve other things in other areas of their lives. And so when I see stuff like that, I think, aren't I lucky that that's part of my job?
Well, it's going back to what you said earlier, and it's something that you've taken from the academy, which is be the person you want to be rather than
yes.
what's expected of you.
Yes.
Is there anything else that, you know, for people who are about to leave school or young Accies watching us here, are there any life lessons that you took from the academy that have taken you through your sporting life, your business life, your sporting executive life that you kind of cling on to?
Gosh, that's a good question. I think certainly my time at the academy did give me more confidence to be curious and to argue. And I know that some people listening to this who know me are probably sighing inside, saying, yes, you know, arguing again. But it's so important to explore and to understand and to ask questions. And I wonder, I mean, one of the coaches I've had, refers to fencing as an argument of the swords, or like a conversation, you're arguing with swords. And I sometimes think maybe that's just the mentality that whether I've got a sword in my hand or words in my mouth, we can have an argument. And I think that arguing for the sake of arguing could be a bit pointless, but I do feel that curiosity and that confidence to ask the questions, to explore topics, and not take no for the answer. And in a weird way, as I said before, the weird thing is about being a girl coming to the academy, you'd think that would make me more likely to conform to gender stereotypes, perhaps be more conscious of being a woman, but it absolutely didn't. It did the reverse. And I think that's such an important thing, particularly for young women, but also from you know, it's not just about gender diversity. We could be talking about religion or ethnicity or anything. I think it's important that we aren't defined by you know, what you're seeing here on the screen, which is, you know, I'm a white woman, but we need to be more than who we present, and have that confidence to stand up for ourselves, and the curiosity to learn from each other. And yeah, and I think that very much came from the academy. And then the thing I would add to that, though, is to have confidence in failure, which is so important, because with curiosity and trying comes failure and success, but we don't learn anything if we don't fail. So.
Good. 3 quick questions to end on. First of all, you've a family. Do they fence?
Kind of. So Isla does, my daughter, not well, but she likes it. She's quite good at it. As in, I say that because of course I'm a proud mummy. She doesn't compete or anything, so she has had a few lessons and fence at the local club. And my son, I think, takes great pride in telling me how much he dislikes fencing and wants to play rugby.
You don't mind that. You don't mind that.
It just fills me with complete fear.
It's about being the person they want to be, and if they want to do it, then great. You don't want to ram it down their throat. Yes,
you see, that's a nice lesson when you're not talking about your own children, isn't it, Charles? So you can say that, except when you watch your son run out to a rugby pitch, and then you go, no, back to fencing.
And two final things. Can you still beat your brother at fencing?
I bet I could. Yeah, that's a challenge, Eric. Just if he won't be watching this. I reckon I could. We used to have some great matches. I have to say, getting beaten by your brother is so irritating. And he did, I would say that when we were probably both before our best, I think he was, I can remember the times I lost to him. He used to have a particularly irritating hit where he used to go and try and hit under my wrist and then drop to my foot. That's so annoying, because when you get hit on the foot, you just feel like you're such a kind of, it's quite insulting, really.
And finally, your little hidden secret is that you have been, and always will be, you've been a Bond girl.
You asked about this earlier, and I did so. I always feel like it's important to put the record straight on this one. So I was an extra in a Bond movie.
You have appeared in a Bond film.
I have, yes, but for a fraction of a second. And I think all the kind of the kudos for that has to go to my teammate, Joe Maynard, who was the double for Rosamund Pike, and my fencing coach, Stephen Paul, and he was James Bond's double. So it's always quite sort of fun to watch those scenes, because when I see them fencing, I'm seeing my teammate and my coach fence each other. But it was, again, those are the kind of amazing experiences you get through sport. I was also very fortunate I was on a music video for a dance track, and I'm sure it was a German dance. And I remember watching that, and it was the most random music video. I mean, you can imagine, because there were fencers in it. I mean, nobody does that these days, but you just get to have all these experiences that I would say day-to-day life doesn't usually throw at you.